So it's funny listening to that last panel because I used to be one of those journalists that got those calls. And it is true. We do appreciate it when someone tells us we actually got something right. It's extremely rare. Anyhow, I don't do that anymore. I write books instead and opinion stories and that kind of thing. And the latest book, as Bob pointed out, is called Listen Liberal. Listen Liberal. Or Whatever Happened to the Party of the People. It's about the Democrats. And the book came out last year, just about a year ago, as a matter of fact, well before the election. And when I wrote it, and I went around the country last year talking about it, one of the ideas that I focused on was how the Democrats failed when the conditions for success were perfect. And the failure I was referring to last year when I went around the country talking about that was economic inequality. The way the divide between rich and everybody else in this country has grown and grown and grown all through the Obama years, even though the chances that Obama got to take action on the subject were many. Right? He had many, many chances, especially during the financial crisis, bailout of Wall Street, all that. And yet it kept going. So the Democrats failed even though the chances for success were perfect. But now, in 2017, I think that phrase has an even more deadly ring to it. How the Democrats failed when the conditions for success were perfect. Now that refers to, think about it, the way they managed to lose to Donald Trump, the most unpopular presidential candidate of all time. This is a guy who thought it was the right thing to do to campaign for president by going around the country making fun of different ethnic groups. Making fun of handicapped people. Insulting the parents of a soldier killed in the Iraq War. They even caught him on tape boasting about, groping women, right? They just know. He just walks right up to them and gets started. This is a guy that knows nothing about government and has no business being in the Oval Office. How do you lose to a guy like that? Well, look, the Democrats found a way. Somehow they did it. So what I'm going to suggest here this morning is that the two failures that I just described are actually the same failure. The Democrats' failure to do much of anything about inequality sprang from their same source. The same source as their failure to understand Trump and his followers and what made Trump tick. Both of these failures came from the same thing. They came from the basic class assumptions of the Democratic Party's leadership. Now, the way I want to get into this subject is by talking about our country. I want to talk about the country that just elected Donald Trump to be its president. And I want to remind you that the last couple of years in this country have been a time of brisk prosperity, according to official measurements. Unemployment is down, the stock market is up. For Americans who work for a living, however, nothing ever seems to improve in this country. Wages don't grow. Median household income today is still well below where it was before the financial crisis. The economists have a way of measuring inequality. They call it the labor share of gross national product as opposed to the share taken by stockholders. And the labor share hit its all-time low point in 2011 and stayed there ever since. In the fall of 2014, with the stock market at an all-time high, there was a poll that came out showing that nearly 3/4 of the American public thought that the economy was still in a recession. And the reason they thought that is because for them it was. Now, there was a time when Americans knew, could be counted upon to give the right answer to a poll question like that. They would know whether things were going up or things were going down in this country, because back in those days, when America prospered, the American people prospered as well. But these days, things are different. Now, let's look at it statistically. From the Great Depression up until the year 1980, the lower 90% of the population in this country, a group that we might refer to as the American people, That group took home 70% of the growth in the country's income. Okay? The economy grew and those people prospered. If you look at the exact same statistics from 1997 up until today, from the beginning of the great dot-com bubble up until today, and what you'll find is that this same group, the American people, pocketed none of this country's income growth at all. Their share in these great good times has been zero. The upper 10% of the population of this country, meaning financiers and managers and professionals, they ate the whole thing. To be a young person in this economy is to understand instinctively the downward slope that so many of us are on these days. College, you know this, college costs are completely out of control in this country. The university where I got a PhD back in the 80s and 90s, to go there today as an undergraduate costs $65,000 a year. 4 years of that is more than $250,000. You want to go to a school like that, you're going to take out a lot of loans. And as I travel this country, I am forever meeting young people who are $50,000, $60,000, and $100,000 in debt. College loans. Okay, and they're starting out life this way. They're going out into this Uberized economy of ours with the equivalent of a mortgage and no house to show for it. Now, you know this, at the other end of the social ladder, of course, it is all upside all the time. Back in 1980, American CEOs made about 40 times as much as their average blue-collar line worker. Today it's 335 times as much. One particularly lucky American family, in fact, has as much wealth as does 40% of the population of this country put together. One family. The main accomplishment of the high-achieving individuals who make up this family, the main accomplishment of these people was to inherit shares in Walmart. You know what Walmart is, the retailer that has sucked the life out of small towns all over the part of the country that I come from. And that's where we are, folks, and it is 10 years now, almost, since the beginning of the financial crisis. And that's where we are, growth that doesn't grow and prosperity that doesn't prosper. The country, people now understand, is no longer arranged in such a way as to make average citizens economically secure. And that's the country that just elected Donald Trump to be its president. What I'm saying, and you guys in this audience know this is true, that the middle class is disintegrating in the great middle class nation. And there is outrage and there is fury around every corner. You scratch any surface and the outrage just comes pouring forth. Now, you would expect everything I just described, all those statistics I gave, all those facts, you would expect this to lead to a revival of the left. And you'd expect that because that's what happened in the past. That's what happened in the 30s. That's what happened in the 1890s. But here's the crazy thing. This is the thing that just, this is what I spend all my time thinking about and writing about. The politics of this age of inequality are different. They have been dominated by right-wing revolts that only accelerate the disintegration of the middle class. Everything that our fellow citizens do to try to solve this situation just makes it worse. And it's Trump right now. But if you think about it, and depending on how you count it, this is the 5th successful right-wing uprising to happen in my lifetime. So I was born in 1965. Nixon came along in 68. They had something called the New Right, and Ronald Reagan in the late 70s. You had Gingrich and the Republican Revolution in the 90s. You had George W. Bush coming straight out of Texas in the aughts, the Tea Party movement, and now Trump. It just keeps chugging along. Talk about how the Republican Party was on what they called a political suicide mission. They would say that its candidates had zero chance in the enlightened new America we were living in. The Republican Party, they said, was being sent to the dustbin of history. And I bring all this up because, as you have recognized, this is exactly the same things that they said last year. Exactly the same. With commentator after commentator insisting that Donald Trump didn't have a chance, that the Republican Party had destroyed itself by nominating this guy. Again and again and again they say this. But to keep with 2009 for the moment, the Republicans back then weren't interested in their own demise, and they did the opposite of what the pundits told them to do. Okay? In Washington, where I live now, if you want to be a pundit, to get your pundit license, you have to believe in the center, the magical power of the center. Every politician, when they get into trouble, they have to move to the center, right? That's always the idea. The Republicans didn't do that in 2009. They did the opposite. They stepped on the gas instead of the brakes. Instead of moving to the center, they purged the moderate faction of the Republican Party. They responded, and this was fascinating, they responded to the obvious failure of markets, which is what the financial crisis was. They responded to the failure of markets by becoming free market zealots. You remember this, waving their copies of Ayn Rand in the air? And then in 2010, this radicalized Republican Party scored its greatest victory in congressional elections in many, many decades. And they took 600 seats from the Democrats at the state level. They purged countless Republican moderates. I remember in Kansas it was particularly bad. Then in 2014, they went on to conquer the Senate, and today the tragedy is complete. In Washington, they dominate, well, obviously they control Congress, the presidency. Trump immediately got to name a judge to the Supreme Court. They control the most legislatures they have since the 1920s. Folks, this is a wipeout for the Democratic Party. And also for all those pundits I just described who have so persistently taken Democratic victory for granted. We don't have to do anything about it. It'll just happen all on its own. Now remember, folks, all of this is happening while in the background, Wall Street loots the world. And the middle class of this country falls to pieces. As Bob mentioned, many years ago I wrote a book about right-wing populism in Kansas, my home state. It's a place where I grew up, and I had a phrase in that book that I was proud of, where I said, out here in Kansas, the gravity of discontent pulls to the right, and to the right, and further to the right. I was proud of that phrase, the gravity of discontent. And when I wrote that, I meant to describe something that was weird. Like, look at this. Something that should be pulling the other way. Look at what it's doing out here in this strange part of America, this remote part, out here on the Great Plains. Well, today, folks, it works that way everywhere. The gravity of discontent pulls to the right everywhere you go in this country. Hell, it's everywhere you go in the Western world. Now, why is that? One of the main reasons is because the Republican Party today is extremely comfortable with the traditional language of populism, by which I mean the language of class anger. And they speak it very naturally. It just comes to their lips. They don't even think about it. They start talking about how much they hate the elite and the rigged system that we live under. And they complain about the Hollywood millionaires, arrogant people that make our TV shows, and the college professors who indoctrinate our kids. And they pretend to love what they call real Americans who inhabit a place that they like to call the heartland. And they deliberately mimic left-wing protest movements from the days of yore. That's what the Tea Party movement was, by the way. It was a fake 1930s protest movement. Deliberately pretending to be a protest movement from the 1930s. Glenn Beck, you remember this guy? He was a very important figure in 2009. Glenn Beck deliberately mimicked Martin Luther King's March on Washington. He had a fake March on Washington. Paul Ryan, who is today the Speaker of the House in 2009, wrote an article in Forbes magazine that he called "Down with Big Business." This is Paul Ryan wrote that. And now comes Trump. I went to the Republican convention in Cleveland last July, and it was a fiasco. It was a botch. The only part of it that was any, where they really tried hard was Trump's speech itself. Trump really worked at that. That was sort of his greatest moment on the national stage. And when he came out there on the stage in Cleveland, they introduced him as America's blue-collar billionaire. I love that. And in his speech, which, as I said, was his one great moment, he pledged himself to working-class voters left behind by the current recovery. This is what Trump said. "I have visited the laid-off factory workers and the communities crushed by our horrible and unfair trade deals." This is Trump. Remember when you say he stole your language? Yes, he certainly did. He did it on purpose. But he goes on. This is, by the way, he's stealing here from Franklin Roosevelt. "These are the forgotten men and women of our country, people who work hard but no longer have a voice." Trump went on and tried to steal the traditional liberal criticism of conservatives as always being, pawns of the billionaires, right? The Koch brothers and all that. Here's what he said. "Big business, elite media, and major donors are lining up behind the campaign of my opponent because they know she will keep our rigged system in place." Rigged system, he stole that from Elizabeth Warren. This is all swiped. You're allowed to do that in politics, by the way. It's perfectly acceptable. Trump goes on. "They're throwing money at her," meaning Hillary, "because they have total control over every single thing she does. She is their puppet, and they pull the strings." This is Donald Trump said this stuff. Now look, we know about Trump now. I mean, the chances that this guy's going to follow through on anything that he promised are real close to zero. This guy is a hypocrite. This guy is a vulgarian. This guy is a bigot. And he's incompetent. I mean, he makes George W. Bush look like a, kind of a genius, But when Trump said those things at the convention, and he repeated them all last fall, when Trump said those things, he connected emotionally. He was right when he said that the system is rigged. Yeah, it is. He's right when he pointed out that huge parts of this country have been deindustrialized, and that's a terrible thing. That is correct. What drives me crazy now, what drove me crazy at the time, is that those are the things that my side used to say. Those are the things that the Democrats used to say. So where are the Democrats in all of this? Where is my side? Now look, if you're as old as me, you know that once upon a time, protecting the middle-class society is what the Democratic Party was all about. That's why you had a Democratic Party. I mean, that was the primary mission. And I can't help but think that Democratic leaders of the past would have known exactly what to do about the situation that we're in today, that I described at the beginning of this talk. You take someone like Franklin Roosevelt or Harry Truman, or Lyndon Johnson, or Hubert Humphrey. Those guys would have taken one look at what Wall Street is doing to this country, is doing to the world, and they would have swung directly into action. But many of our modern Democratic leaders falter. Now they know that inequality is awful, and they cry big, hot tears about it, but they can't find the conviction or the imagination to do what is necessary to put this thing into reverse. And instead they offer us the same high-minded policy platitudes that they have been dishing out since the 1980s. They tell us, oh, dude, there's nothing anybody can do about it. Technology, right? Nothing you can do about that. That's just changing the world. Nothing you can do about globalization, right? They sort of worship globalization, right? And they think that is the invisible hand of God Almighty. Globalization, you can't do anything about that. And so instead the Democrats promise us, you know the list, charter schools, job training, and they'll shovel out student loans. But other than that, folks, they got nothing. Now, the example that I want to focus on is also from 2009, the same year that the pundits were declaring the Republican Party dead. And the reason I go back to 2009 is because that was the year of the Wall Street bailouts. If you ask me, that was the most important issue of this stupid century that we're in right now. That was the turning point. That was the moment where this country could have changed course. Okay, that was the turning point, and folks, we missed the turn. I want you to try to remember what it was like that year. Barack Obama had been elected president in an enormous wave of hope and enthusiasm, and I was one of the hopeful ones. Barack Obama had this country at his back. He had the entire world at his back. And then he proceeded to continue the bailout policies of George W. Bush, essentially unchanged. No big banks got put out of business. By the way, we put banks out of business in Kansas all the time. It happens all the time. But oh no, you can't do that to Goldman. Can't do that to J.P. Morgan. No. No bailouts got unwound. No top bankers got prosecuted. Hell, they didn't even get fired. He did fire the chairman of GM, a guy who richly deserved it. But oh no, you can't fire the guys at Citibank. Oh no. What I'm saying is that Obama and his team refused to change course when every sign was telling them it was time to turn. When it would have been good for the country to turn. I mean, healthy, economically healthy to do something about Wall Street. When it was fully within the president's power to turn at the time. He had seats on all of these boards because of the bailouts. When it would have been overwhelmingly popular to turn. I mean, overwhelmingly popular. He would still be president today had he gotten tough with these guys. We would have amended the Constitution and made him run for president a third time. He would be so beloved. And lastly, when the country fully expected Obama and the Democrats to make the turn. When I say the country, I mean the Wall Street bankers themselves. Right? There was this famous moment, almost exactly 8 years ago. He was, newly installed in the White House, and he called the Wall Street bankers down from Manhattan. They had a big meeting in the White House. Do you remember this? And the Wall Street bankers go into the meeting, and they're ashen-faced because they know what's going to happen to them. The new Franklin Roosevelt is going to take them to the woodshed. And they come out of the meeting a couple hours later, all smiles. Nothing changed, they say. Nothing changed. Instead, we foamed the runways for them, in the immortal phrase of Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner. We foamed the runways for the banks. Why? Now look, let's get one thing out of the way right away. Barack Obama didn't play the greatest issue of our time the way he did because the working class rose up to defend its friends on Wall Street. That did not happen. He didn't play it the way he did because the presidency isn't powerful enough. The presidency is an enormously powerful office, as we're reminded every morning when we open up the newspaper and see what outrage Donald Trump has committed. No. Barack Obama played this issue the way he did back in 2009 because that's how he wanted to play it. We have to get our heads around that if we want to understand what's gone wrong with this country. But in truth, that just pushes the problem back a little bit. I mean, it doesn't start with Barack Obama. You want to understand why he chose to act the way he did in 2009, you have to go back to the 1970s, the 80s, the 1990s. And back in those days, the Democratic Party was, you guys remember this, they were in this kind of constant civil war in the Democratic Party, fighting and fighting and fighting over who they were and what they stood for. And there were all these different factions. And they fought like cats and dogs, but there was one thing that they all agreed upon at the end of the day, and that was that the Democrats had to turn away from the legacy of the New Deal with its fixation on working class people. Okay, they fought over everything else, but they all agreed on that. They could not be the party of the New Deal any longer. And the man who sort of came to personify this change in the Democratic Party was, of course, Bill Clinton, who was elected president back in 1992. And you might remember an interesting story about Bill Clinton. when he was running for president in '92, he came up with this strategy as a candidate where he would go out of his way to insult or sort of distance himself from some traditional Democratic constituency, like labor or like minority groups. And in this way, he would assure the public that he was his own man. The most famous example of this was when he sort of contrived to insult Jesse Jackson to his face while the cameras rolled. You remember this? And the idea then, I mean, the details don't really matter. It's that Clinton did this because he knew it couldn't hurt him. And the phrase that they would use back at the time was that those people have nowhere else to go. Do you remember this? Nowhere else to go. So he could do whatever he wanted to them. Now, eventually he becomes president, and this campaign tactic of insulting your own base goes from being a campaign tactic to a full-blown strategy of government, right? Body slamming the very people that just got you elected. The main example here, of course, is the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, which had been, you remember, was negotiated by Republicans, but Republicans couldn't get it through Congress because, of course, Congress at the time was always controlled by Democrats. But Bill Clinton could get it done. With Rahm Emanuel at his side, Bill Clinton was going to drive a steamroller over organized labor and get NAFTA passed. And when he did this, he wasn't just insulting you guys. He wasn't just insulting his friends in organized labor who had just got him elected. He was conniving in their ruin. He was assisting in the destruction of their economic power, doing his part to undermine his own party's greatest ally, and to ensure that in any kind of conflict or confrontation or grievance between management and labor, that management would always have the upper hand. That they could always threaten to move the plant to Mexico. Oh, and do they do this? When you negotiate with it all the time, right? It always comes up, yeah. And sometimes they follow through on it, as we all know. So when he got NAFTA done, Clinton made the problems of working people materially worse. And again, the logic was the same. We can do that to them because they got nowhere else to go. Anyhow, what they called the New Democrats, this is Clinton's faction in the Democratic Party, they didn't think NAFTA was a disaster at the time. They thought this was a great achievement. They thought this was going to, putting all the great economic things aside that they thought it was going to do, which it didn't do, but they thought it was this really brave act, that he really showed courage, and it was like a Winston Churchill kind of moment for Bill Clinton. There was a biography of Clinton that came out in 1996. It was very favorable. It was filled with admiration for Bill Clinton, and the author said that he acknowledged that Clinton had a few failings, but he said that those failings were, in the end, balanced and even outweighed by his part in finally sinking the untenable old consensus of the New Deal and the crafting of a new one. Okay? Think about that. That's why they liked him, because he ended the New Deal. That's why they liked him. So the author of that passage referred to a new consensus. What did he mean by that? Well, the same democratic thinkers who kept telling the party that they had to abandon workers and abandon the New Deal had the answer. What Democrats had to embrace, they said, was an emerging post-industrial economy. And the people, this is important, the people that the Democratic Party needed to identify with were the winners in this new economic order. The winners, okay? The highly educated professionals who populate our innovative knowledge industries. What do I mean by professionals? We know the traditional professions are lawyers, doctors, people. It's everybody with an advanced degree. It includes math PhDs who write derivative securities on Wall Street. It includes biochemists who make prescription drugs. Interesting fact, back in the 1950s, as a category, professionals were one of the most Republican groups in America. By the 1990s, they had completely changed sides, And they're one of the most democratic groups in the country. And that's where the Democratic Party is today. It's a party, it's a class party. It's just not the party of the working class, it's the party of the professional class. These highly educated, very affluent, white-collar professionals. And the Democrats, as we all know, it's the big tent. They have lots of other constituencies, minorities, women, and the young, among many others. But professionals are the ones who come first. They sit in the front seat, they got their hands on the steering wheel, and all the rest of us ride in back. And it's their tastes, their manners that are always celebrated by liberal newspapers, their favorite TV shows, their delicate artisanal cupcakes, their handcrafted cocktails. By the way, I was in Seattle the other day. I was walking down the street in Seattle and they had handcrafted slingshots in a store window. It's like, this is the next artisanal thing. It's like, yes, but my slingshot is made of real hickory. I mean, it's like, it's insane. You know, my white collar slingshot. It's, okay. Look, this is the point. American liberalism started as a populist movement, a movement of average people, working class people, farmers, that sort of thing. But today it is the opposite of that. It is a movement of winners and of the highly credentialed. And liberals have generated all of these flattering phrases for their favorite demographic group. They have all these terms of endearment. They call these high-achieving professionals, they call them the wired workers who will inherit the future. They're supposed to be a learning class that truly gets the power of education. They're a creative class. Have you heard this one? I mean, here we are in Austin, Texas. This is the great, the mecca of the creative class, right? I mean, think about it. You ever think about this term, creative class? The idea that creativity is the property of a social class, a really, wealthy social class, and that we have to reorganize our cities in order to attract creative people. We have to set up arts districts and street fairs and give them the artisanal cupcakes and all of this crap, right? And we have to negotiate trade deals to make the creative class feel at home. Otherwise, they'll all flee to Denmark or something like this. But you see what I'm getting at here is that I'm describing a complete shift in the Democratic Party from the traditional middle class, the working class, to professionals. And this shift, I think, explains just about everything that is frustrating and annoying about our modern day Democratic Party. I mean, how do you get in a situation like we're in today, where inequality is growing, inequality is out of control? I mean, folks, you know this, we are headed back to a 19th century sort of pattern of wealth distribution in this country, and yet the party of the left can't take advantage of it. The party of the left is in a state of historic defeat. The middle class is disintegrating, and people are turning to a charlatan like Donald Trump. Desperate people. How is this possible? This is only possible, folks, when the party of the left, which is what the Democrats are not interested in their historic mission. That's the only way you get this combination of inequality and defeat. So why aren't they interested? What ails these people? Well, let's go back to the problem of the Wall Street banks back in 2009. Why was it that the Democratic administration failed to do what obviously needed to be done with these guys? Why did Obama's team declare that Wall Street executives are going to be held to a different legal standard than ordinary criminals? And by the way, they did declare that. The guy who said it was a high official in the Justice Department. He had to resign as soon as it became public knowledge, but he did say it. Why do our modern Democrats choose Wall Street over average Americans again and again and again? Why? Because for the achievement-conscious people who filled the administration, investment bankers are more than friends. These guys are classmates. Right? They're peers. They are the face in the mirror when you get up in the morning. You look at something like the Treasury Department and J.P. Morgan, and they are demographically identical. They are exactly the same. The two groups are the same. People go back and forth through the revolving door and nobody notices because there is no difference. You know, someone that like to say the Treasury Department or the Justice Department. And they look at Wall Street and they see an industry filled with people with southern minds, this innovativeness, and the sophisticated jargon. God, they love that jargon. I mean, it's complete bullshit, right? You know this, right? The Wall Street people made up a phony jargon in order to make it hard for outsiders to see what they're doing, so that we don't understand what they're up to, right? But the Justice Department under Obama, they look at that and they're like, oh dude, that's sophistication. They love that. Right? These are exactly the sort of creative individuals that Democratic Party theory tells us we must honor and respect, right? They're these financial wizards who are plucking wealth from thin air, right? Making these financial instruments that are so beautiful, so admirably complex. They love that, right? It's like financial rocket science, as one member of the administration said. By the way, he said that as an excuse for why they couldn't do anything about these guys. Dude, it's financial rocket science. Nobody understands it, man. We can't enforce the law on these guys. It's complexity, man. It blows your mind. And it's exactly the same for Big Pharma, you know. Oh, so innovative. You can't import generic pharmaceuticals from Canada or India. No. You have to protect these innovative companies. You have to protect Pfizer. And folks, mega dittos for Silicon Valley, an industry that can do no wrong in democratic eyes. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg, so lovable, right? So professional, so creative, that for this one industry, enforcement of our country's antitrust laws was basically suspended, just for this one industry. So I said that the Democrats are a party of the professional class. They're a class party. But what does a party of the professional class look like? What does it believe in? Well, there's only one item that I'm going to talk about tonight. It's the only one that matters, and that is it's meritocracy. The idea that the successful deserve their rewards, that the people on top in our society are up there because, goddamn it, they are the best. All right? This is the first commandment of the professional managerial class. Everyone gets what they deserve, and what they deserve is defined by how they did in school. So the only solution for inequality, according to this way of looking at the world, is to go to a really good school, a really top college, right? Do y'all ever read the New York Times pundit Tom Friedman? Do you know who this guy is? How many times has he made this point? The only solution for the working class in this country is to go to a fancy college. Not any college. It can't just be any. It has to be a really special college, right? The only answer is more education. And so they look at those farmers out in rural Missouri watching their way of life blow away in the wind. And they say, dude, the only answer for you is to go to MIT or something. I mean, you understand what I'm getting at here. This is not a philosophy for reducing inequality. This is a philosophy for rationalizing inequality. It always pushes the blame back onto you as an individual. It's always your own fault. Inequality is about the way that you screwed up in grade school, right? Or you didn't finish high school, or you didn't go to college, or maybe you did go to college but you studied the wrong thing. It's always your own fault. They always have a way of pushing the blame back onto the individual. By the way, this is exactly the opposite of what the labor movement is all about. The idea of meritocracy, where it's every man for himself, and it's all about how you did on the SAT test, is the exact opposite of solidarity. There is no solidarity in a meritocracy. It's exactly the opposite philosophy. This is a philosophy of winners that I'm describing here. It is a party of winners. It's a party that believes in winners and rationalizes winners and endlessly talks about how winners deserve what they have. Think about Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, okay? Obsessed with big data and micro-targeting. And her appeal to voters when she went out to vote and said, why should you vote for me? It was all about her resume and her credentials. And by the way, I did vote for her, and I did think she was the most experienced. I did think she would have been a good president. But that's not how you sell a candidate to the general public. I mean, think about the Democratic Party's unofficial campaign slogan in this last go-round. It was, "America is already great." I mean, it sounds like something you'd see on a country club logo somewhere. America is already great. Now, you guys know this. For decades, the hopes of people like us have been sacrificed by the Democratic Party on the altar of money. They say, look, all elections are decided by money. We know this. Therefore, Democrats have to match Republicans dollar for dollar in fundraising, and therefore we have to become just like the Republicans. How many times have you heard this? Well, look at what happened this time around. Not only did they match the Republicans dollar for dollar, Hillary outraised and outspent Donald Trump 2-1 and still managed to lose. Any of the other sort of patented moves of Democratic centrism. I went to the Democratic convention as well, and the Democrats partied with the Wall Street guys. You know, they got cozy with the generals in the national security set. They reached out to all these Republicans. There's many, many Republicans who spoke at the Democratic convention. You know, all this moving to the center. Hillary was constantly moving to the center. They reminisced about the days of the balanced budget, for Pete's sake. They even encouraged delegates at the Democratic convention to take Ubers back and forth from the convention hall to their hotels in order to show how strongly Democrats approved of what Silicon Valley is doing to the country. And still these guys lost. They did all that stuff, and still they managed to lose. Now we need to remember this, folks, because the whole point of centrism is winning, right? They've discarded all their principles, they've discarded all their idealism on the altar of winning. Okay? They have betrayed the base of the party in hundreds of different ways, and they deregulated the banks, and they did these awful trade deals that I talked about, and they signed off on the Wall Street bailouts, and they signed off on the Iraq War. And those of us who bridled at these things were instructed to sit down and shut up, because centrism would bring us victory. Okay? They're the victory faction, and they know how it's done. They know how to win the White House, and they would hold off these scary, awful, terrifying Republicans like Bob Dole and Mitt Romney, right? So scary. Well, this time around, the Republicans really did nominate someone who was honest to God scary. A man who really should have been kept out of the White House. And the centrists choked. They didn't keep him out. They didn't win. They sold out all the principles, and for what? They delivered Democrats to the worst situation that they have been in many decades, with control of no branch of government and only a handful of state legislatures. As for this man Trump, I think he will make he is a perfect epitaph for the era of professional class liberalism. He is the opposite of everything that Democrats respect. He lacks government experience completely. He's utterly incompetent. He holds expertise in contempt. He is indifferent to facts. He is a human middle finger to everything that the Democratic Party... Think about it. That's exactly what he is. He is a human middle finger to everything that the Democratic Party claims to respect. I mean, he is aggressively incompetent, and Washington is reeling from his folly. I mean, every morning we wake up and say, what the hell has this guy done? And what is our response to the age of Trump going to be? Well, my friends in Washington, nice professional class liberals, think that the answer is to cast the parties as a party of righteousness versus a party of sin. A party of enlightenment versus a party of ignorance. But I can't help but think that the right answer to fake populism is to give people the real deal. Not to talk about what fine, enlightened people we are, but to convince Trump supporters that we care about him a lot more than Trump does. That, yeah, the system is rigged, and Donald Trump is one of the people that rigged it. As you know, I'm from Kansas. And I think that populism by itself is a very healthy thing. A suspicion of elites, a hostility towards privilege and arrogance and aristocracy and bosses, these are good things. This is who we are as a people. You know, that's what democracy is all about. And it's not hard to figure out the kind of issues that would appeal to those Trump voters and bring them back into the Democratic fold, and at the same time do something about inequality, do something about the fact that the middle class is falling apart in this country. Reindustrialization sounds like a good idea. Universal health care, it's very popular. How about enforcing the antitrust laws of this country again? How about making college free, or at least affordable? It's a good idea. How about making it easier to form unions in this country? Look, these aren't radical issues. These are all familiar Rooseveltian liberalism. These are all deep in the Democratic grain. And they're not hard to think up. It's not hard to come up with issues. The problem is not, I mean, it took me about 10 seconds to come up with that list that I just gave. The problem is not coming up with issues, it's making the Democratic Party adopt these things, because they are going to resist everything I just described, you know, to the end of their being. That is exactly what they fight against these days. Until the day we get them to change their mind on these things, we are going to bounce along from government by one group of rich people to government by a different group of rich people. You know, your consensus-minded Clintonism deregulates Wall Street and then yields to George W. Bush authoritarianism, which deregulates Wall Street some more, and then self-destructs and allows the consensus team another chance, which they fumble, and so on and so on and so on. Folks, where is this all going to end? Only when we, the people, finally come back for our party. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to take some questions.
Trump being the middle finger of
Jonathan's out there, and I'll come out.
Yes, I just want to say one thing, and I come from the state of Walker and how we're running and everything else.
Yeah.
But one thing which I've seen in our Democratic Party, we started this last year, and they've got in every congressional district, they've got a person that's working to develop teams, and they go out there forming parties and going out to try to raise the membership of the Dems. And hopefully they're talking about real-life issues that you talk about. So hopefully my state is starting to change things around. In the video which I just did take, will go on our Dems Facebook page. So, they're going to see our feelings and what they need to do. And I think hopefully my state will turn things around.
Thank you. I hope so. Yeah. Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
I do love Wisconsin. I lived in Chicago for many years, and Wisconsin was like the vacation area for us. We'd go up there. I hope so.